We'll figure this out.
All right. Hi, everybody. So John, have you done the introduction and all that stuff?
Yes. I've
Okay,
introduced you, and let me see if I can get your slides up here.
All right. Well, it looks like the internet also might be coming back here. Let's hold on here a second. It just may be working out.
Okay.
Oh, all right. I got to go back in and rejoin again. So I'm going to go back in and rejoin from the invitation, but it looks like it's going to be okay, everybody. Anyway, it's great to see everybody. All these names, my goodness, it's like old home week. I used to be a member of the Baltimore, Washington chapter, but now that I am back home in Colorado, here we go, open in Zoom. I guess I will be caucusing with the Central Rocky Mountain chapter from here on out. And I'm going to join the meeting in progress, I hope, here. I'm sorry for the apology. I use Starlink internet, you know, the Elon Musk satellite thing. And it's intermittent, to say the least. It gets intermittent. So I think you guys could let me back in the room.
You have been
See if
admitted.
that works. I'm being admitted. It's better than being committed.
Admit nothing.
I don't, usually. All right, there we go. Okay, got it. It's being joined with computer audio.
All right.
All right.
Hello,
Hello,
everybody.
everybody.
And now that I can see
on the screen,
I could actually literally say I know most all of you. There's very few of you I haven't personally met yet. And I want to thank you for taking time out this evening to watch my presentation. It's been a long time since I spoke to your chapter. I think it's been probably close to 10 years. And let me know when it's up on the screen for y'all.
It looks great, Phil.
All right. Well, once again, tonight's topic is the United States efforts to develop domestic supplies of critical minerals. And we'll talk about all those definitions and all those good things. Of course, we have to start with a disclaimer. The opinions presented here are mine only. They don't reflect the position of EPA, official or otherwise, or any other agency or organization I'm hanging out with these days. The purpose is to communicate and facilitate discussion. I don't think I have any conflicts of interest. And the list of actions I'm going to talk about here tonight are not complete, but they're rather an example of U.S. efforts because they keep changing. I had to modify one of my slides today because there was an article that just came out today. So things are very dynamic and changing right now. So a little background. So for basically the last 40 years, globalization has been the buzzword. And that's been approaching to supply chains and relying on the international sources of raw materials and products. This whole just-in-time inventory approach to things that didn't work out well, and of course downsizing our jobs, offshoring our trained and knowledgeable workforce. And that when it comes to this kind of stuff, China ended up controlling most of the critical mineral supply, and it presents a vulnerability now. About 10 years ago, Japan and China were getting in a little bit of a tiff, and China threatened Japan on cutting off their supplies of critical minerals, of rare earths. And that got alarm bells off around the world. It really did. And so not only the United States, but other countries now, they're reverting back to more of domestic sources of these critical minerals, or with partners who share their values, which is what we'll probably be doing in the short term while the money gets flowing downstream and we get all this stuff online. And it's going to take time and resources, of course. So, to undo 40 years of globalization, that's going to take time. So what are these critical minerals we're talking about? So the Energy Act of 2020 defined them as a non-fuel mineral, and that's important, or a mineral material essential to the economic or national security of the United States, and which has a supply chain vulnerable to disruption. Critical minerals are also characterized as serving an essential function in the manufacturing of a product, the absence of which would have significant consequences for the economy or national security. Now, the list includes the rare earth elements, which are what the focus of this talk. And many rare earth elements are associated with natural radioactivity. Other critical minerals with a norm problem include, let's say, lithium and cobalt, and they're hot commodities right now. And critical minerals, including the rare earths, are crucial to numerous industries and national defense. Quickly here, this map is not the best, but it's out of a pending report that we're working on, showing that there are deposits all across the country, but they're mostly gathered here out west where I am. And just as a quick reviewer, what are the rare earth minerals? They're that table along the bottom, that line of elements that runs along the bottom, comes off, it kind of goes down and out from the third column of the periodic table. And you got your light rare earths and your heavy rare earths, and we'll talk about them a little more here as we go forward. Now, they're interesting because they're not all that rare. They're actually out there and you can find them, but very rarely are they in economic deposits. Now, these elements share a high trivalent charge, and they're big. They have a similar large ionic size, and they don't fit well into most mineral crystal structures. So they're kind of called incompatible, and they're really, really hard to chemically separate. It's one thing to get the first cut out of them and to get like a concentrate, but to get the individuals done, that takes a bunch of work. And that's why there's so few processing facilities around the world that actually do this. So, there's a whole lot of these different compounds. The ones we see mostly that we're going to be dealing with are euxenite, bastnasite, xenotime, monazite, allanite. And of course, the bastnasite is what is out there at Mountain Pass, and monazite we find around the country.
What?
Please stay muted. Thank you. So on this list of critical minerals, we're going to go through them here. They update this. The United States Geological Survey is in charge of this list. They update it every few years. For instance, in 2018, they just had the rare earths listed as just that, the rare earths. They weren't listed individually. And uranium was on the list. But it was pulled off because uranium is a fuel. It's not a critical mineral. So it's handled along with the other fuels, coal and stuff like that. So these next few pages just show what the current list of critical minerals are. And the ones that are in yellow, I just highlighted because they're in play right now more than others. I'm old enough to remember when we did these critical minerals stockpiles back in the Cold War. I remember when they were selling off the fluorspar. That was one of the last ones that they ended up selling off in the 90s. And now we're starting to restockpile these things again. And you'll all have access to these slides, so you could go back through those later if you want to actually look at what each one is. And so when this last list was put out last year, they dumped uranium and listed the rare earths individually, such that now there's 50 elements on that list that we went past. And so now, of course, there is this increasing emphasis on securing supply chains for these minerals. And they're essential not just for defense, but for reaching the nation's clean energy goals. And, this is 2023, so we just don't go out there and start digging holes in the ground. We have to do things in a way that are sustainable, doesn't compromise environmental standards. You have all the stakeholders, especially the tribes. And we're going to talk about that a little more here as we go through the talk. And there's been executive orders under both Trump and Biden to develop and ensure the reliability of domestic supplies of critical minerals, and again, with partners who share our values. And that would be Canada, Australia, countries like that. And again, Tenorm is an issue that must be considered. We're going to talk about permitting reform here in a little bit. And if we don't address the radioactivity up front in the licensing and permitting process, it could slow down your whole project. So what's the radioactivity associated with them? Well, no big surprise. It's the uranium and thorium decay series and potassium. Once in a while, we'll see things like rubidium or whatnot, but it's such a small component of it. It's obviously the ones we're used to playing with. Radium, radon, lead, and polonium are the primary critters we have to deal with, in addition to the parent uranium and thorium. And IAEA noted that the natural occurrence of the rare earths with uranium and thorium and their decay products presents problems in rare earth extraction and processing, results in production of radioactive wastes, and causes radiation exposures to humans and the environment. And, we all have the legacy of mining out west here in the States, and it's something we don't want to repeat again. We don't want to do what we did the last time again. And, each ore body is going to be heterogeneous within that deposit. Very rarely are they consistent and homogeneous. The laccolithic ones that have rhyolite as a source, like Round Top in Texas, those are fairly consistent. But most of these others, the way they were deposited and whatnot, they're heterogeneous. And so obviously that's going to result in different concentrations and volumes of the radionuclides that are present at the mines and the processing facilities. And, all of us that have ever done licensing of uranium know that the fuel cycle begins at the mill. All right. The Atomic Energy Act does not address mining. It was cut out of mining back in the day. And so, we treat mines under one set of rules and the mills under another set of rules. And of course, this heterogeneity can result in different radiation exposures, radioactive waste volumes at those stages of the production cycle. Now, what are we talking about here? Well, I'm just going to be general because they are all over the place, but basically your ores are going to be tens to hundreds of picocuries per gram. Now, some of the other minerals, of course, they're done in ppm, but generally most of these ores don't exceed a couple of percent, no matter what the mineral is. Now, you get the concentrates, obviously, you're going to have hundreds to thousands of picocuries per gram, and a lot of it. Products, pretty good, single digits, unless there's something that is incorporated into the product for its radioactive purposes. For instance, thorium paint on nose cones, because it's heat resistant, things like that. And again, the wastes up to hundreds of thousands of picocuries per gram. Effluents, we don't really know about what's coming out the pipe on the effluents at these mines and mills. Now, if it's a uranium mill, there's zero discharge, but we don't know how some of these others are permitted under the Clean Water Act. And emissions are undefined also. Obviously, radon and thoron are the biggest concerns. Now, thoron, who cares? It has a 55-second half-life, but decay products are up to 10-hour half-lives. So the decay products can travel pretty far. Now, mostly it's thallium-208, and I don't know about you, but I don't really care about thallium-208 out there in the atmosphere in these little picocuries per gram when we take grandma and light her up with a couple of millicuries of thallium-208 to do diagnostic therapy, diagnostic medicine. So we have to keep our health physics hat on here sometimes to make sure we're not overstepping what we need to be doing. Back there. So there's plenty of projects that could be developed. I'm saying these 5 right now are the ones that are probably most likely to get permitted and get going here over the next decade. Now, Mountain Pass in California is the existing mine. It's bastanite. It primarily generates light rare earth elements. It's not big on the heavy rare earths. Now, Mountain Pass has had a rough go of it here in the last 15 years. Previous owners, Molycorp, had a lot of pipeline breaks. They had some big releases. And basically the county shut them down. And then they rebuilt that plant. I believe it was the Japanese came in and poured about $1 billion into the plant. That didn't work. And they ended up going bankrupt again and were sliced and diced into pieces. The mill is not really functioning well. The mine is there, and they are mining and sending it's kind of a concentrate out to China for processing, because we have no processing here in the States. We can mine it, but we don't have any processing facilities to do individual rare earths here in the States right now. Bear Lodge in Wyoming, light and heavy rare earths. That was an old uranium mine. Same thing with Boken Mountain in Alaska, light and heavy rare earths up there. And again, it's an existing mine that was used for uranium, but the rare earth deposit is just over the ridge. Elk Creek, Nebraska. This is in far southeast Nebraska. Primarily has light rare earth elements. I don't know how far that one is going to go because it's a very deep deposit and it's saturated. So there would be a lot of water management and a lot of residuals. And by their estimates, they need to raise about $1 billion to try and get that one off the ground. So I just don't know how that one's going to go. And the last one I mentioned already is Round Top Mountain. It's in South Texas. It has light and heavy rare earth elements, and that's the one where the whole mountaintop is the ore body. So we'll see how that one goes. As I just mentioned, the States, we don't really have any facility that could fully process rare earths in significant quantities. And as I mentioned, Mountain Pass, they're sending their stuff to China. Now in Utah, we still have one conventional uranium mill left in Utah. And they have not campaigned uranium in years. It's just not economic. But they have been running alternate feeds through their plant. They take waste from whoever and they run it through the mill and they pull out whatever uranium is in that waste. And then what comes out the pipe is 11E2 byproduct material. Lo and behold, it's now uranium mill tailings. And it all goes into their impoundments right there. So White Mesa made a determination, I mean, like 2 years ago, that they were going to get into this rare earth business a little bit. And they set up a contract with a mine down in Georgia to get their monazite and shipped it to Utah to the mill, ran it through the mill, got uranium out of it, and then they did extra processing on it, solvent extraction. It's a multi-stage solvent extraction to get the monazite into a concentrate. And they shipped that to Estonia for processing. And Estonia, the Silmet facility, has actually sent a bunch of their waste to White Mesa for burial also. So they kind of have a symbiotic thing going. But the thing that's crucial here is White Mesa went from concept to shipping in 18 months. Because they already had the facility and they already have a license, and the Utah Agreement State Radiation Control Program didn't make them do a whole license amendment and an EA or any of that stuff. They just let them do this right under their existing license. So it saved them a lot of time and money, and here they are. Now, last week, it popped up in the papers that a small company up in Massachusetts announced that they can now process rare earths, but they gave little details. They didn't say if they were processing lights or heavies, so we'll see what goes on there. But this is evolving very quickly. And looking to the future, one of the reasons critical minerals are so important will be apparent here in a minute. And so internationally, I work on a bunch of these committees with the IAEA and ICRP, and what are we doing with Norm around the world? They're driving, the IAEA is driving all of their stuff related to Norm through the United Nations goals on sustainable development. And you may have heard about the SDGs. They're pretty popular, and they are gaining traction, and they're giving cover. And but they also give focus. You know, we want to reduce poverty. We want to do this and that. So a lot of the the things we're talking about are driven through these sustainable goals. And one of the instances is reprocessing tailings. We have billions of tons of tailings laying out there from all kinds of mines. Why can't we go back in there and recover what's in them? And they're looking at that quite a bit. We'll talk about that a little more. Mainly it's economic, because there's traces in there and there's going to have to be some kind of subsidies or whatnot to make that work. And along with ESG, which is a whole nother talk, big changes are coming in. ESG is governance, corporate governance. Instead of just having your corporate goals being maximizing shareholder profit, which is, forever, now your corporations are aligned with environment, sustainability, and good governance. And that's how corporations are being evaluated by their stakeholders now. And of course, there's pushback on ESG goals. There's an article yesterday about BlackRock, which is, one of these big firms, and a certain political party was saying, ha, 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 we got them to take $4 billion out of their ESG portfolio. They were thumping their chest like they, and so Larry gets back, this is at Davos last week, and he goes, yeah, we lost $4 billion, but we took in $400 billion into ESG accounts. So this is the future. This is where things are going. And again, here's one of the problems. In 50 years, there's going to be 10 billion people on Earth. We just surpassed 8 billion people, a month or two ago? And there's not going to be any minerals left. They're all the low-hanging fruits going to have been mined out. And so we have to rethink for our grandchildren. How are we going to do this? What kind of world are we going to be leaving for Keith Richards in 50 years? We have to worry about that. And before we could go forward, we have to fix what happened in the past. Now, prior to the implementation of the environmental legislation in the 70s, back in the day, there was no requirement for any kind of restoration or recovery. Mineral mines, they just walked away when no longer profitable. That was not illegal. That's just how it was. Now, the problem is now we have 160,000, give or take, orphaned and abandoned hard rock mines out there. And before we go forward with new mines, certain stakeholders want us to take care of the old problem and clean it up. And of course, a lot of this, it gets thrown on us as taxpayers to deal with, because those corporations are long gone. EPA has, I don't know how many mine sites on the Superfund, hundreds, and it's a big deal. Now, what you hear a lot of them talking about is the 1872 mining law. And we need to fix that, and we need to stream mining permitting. Yeah, that's great. And now, but the argument over the 1872 mining law really isn't environmental. It's actually about money. Okay, under the mining law, you could locate something, you could stake claims, you could apply for a patent back in the day where you'd actually get title to the land, and you didn't have to pay any royalties. Now, the claims are unpatented, and so sometimes the miner will have the mining rights, but the surface right goes to somebody else. It's a mess. Now, in the 70s, we had the federal land management agencies. They published and promulgated their laws. So all the requirements for environmental analysis, for discharging, for cleaning up, reclamation, all of that comes out of these newer laws that have been around for like 40 years. And so they also need a little bit of updating, because the ones that are in play here are from the Forest Service and the BLM. And they're not really consistent with each other, and there's some gaps in there. And so a lot of the issues that you're hearing in Congress on permitting reform is going to be about whether or not they're going to be leasing or not. And coal and most other newer minerals, they're done on a lease basis, and they pay royalties to the government. And again, like the slide says, that's where you get all your requirements for bonds and reclamation and environmental protection. So these legacies persist. And let's face it, the newer mines, there are worlds of better than the old mines. They really are. The newer mines today are well designed, but stakeholders still have a problem, particularly the tribes. They continue to be impacted by historical mining operations that occurred prior to the enactment of the environmental laws and reclamation. Okay. And here's a link later you could click on if you want to see where a lot of these abandoned mines are. And they're on or again proximate to native lands. I don't want to get into how it works, but Indian country is not just the reservation itself. Indian country could go way beyond the boundaries of the reservations. Now, inspection and enforcement could be weak in many areas. States are not like fat with money, and they don't have enough staff. And so we've been working on this, talking on these conference calls. BLM's mining's regulations under these newer laws, they came around in 1980, and then they were updated in 2000, 2001. The Forest Service did theirs in 74, and they haven't updated them since. And neither one of them really require a full-blown NEPA analysis and EIS unless there's significant surface disturbance. I think it's the Forest Service one. If it's less than 5 acres, you don't have to do any kind of NEPA at all. All you have to do is notify them that you're going to be up there doing your thing. And again, discussions are ongoing constantly here about what reforms to enact to get the goals, the United States goals of being less dependent on other countries. So now, again, there's been a bunch of executive actions coming out of Trump and of the Biden administration. And actually, there was one or two under President Obama, but they were a little tangential, so I didn't include them here. But in 2017, President Trump issued the EO 13817, and that's the one that we're really working off here, because the policy is to reduce our vulnerability to disruptions in the supply of critical minerals. And of course, remember, a lot of these critical minerals have military applications and strategic applications. Then in 2019, the DOC put out this document of federal strategy on how to do this, and it was released. And this is one of these all of government approaches. Both presidents wanted an all of government approach to these things, and so there's a lot of kibbutzing and interagency discussions that go on and still are. And then later in 2019, he did a presidential determination under the Defense Production Act to provide production capability for these minerals and elements as essential to the national defense. And in 2020, this is when they started throwing money out. Linus Corporation got some money in April 2020, and MP, which is Mountain Pass, they got some money. There was a little bit of heartburn over funding Mountain Pass because the company that ended up with it has, I think, a 10% Chinese stake. But they're the ones with the brain power. They're the ones that know how to do this. So both projects were funded. And I drove by Mountain Pass, let's say in June, and there were sky cranes all over the place that you could see from the highway. So they're putting up red iron and structures to start working on redoing that plant there. And then in 2020, he signed another executive order on the supply chain and reliance on critical minerals. I'm not going to read that whole title. And it required progress reports from these agencies on progress to secure domestic supply of critical minerals. And these reports are still coming out. We're still meeting. Things are actually still moving forward on these. In November 2020, the Department of Defense issued theirs, rare element awards. And they gave a couple million here to a little company and a few $100K to another one. And again, Mountain Pass was getting some more. Oh, 9.6 million to Mountain Pass to develop light rare earth processing. And then later they were given another 35 million to Mountain Pass to design and build a facility to process heavy rare earth elements. So, these guys got over 40 million already to develop both light and heavy rare earth element processing at Mountain Pass. And then we get the infrastructure bill. That was in 2021. It's hard to believe that all that was in 2021 when we went through all that stuff over the infrastructure bill. And a portion of the bill is directed at energy and mineral issues. And it has some provisions for supporting geological and geophysical data preservation, and a USGS energy and minerals research facility and a rare earths element demonstration facility, $240 million. Now, what's interesting there, the geological and geophysical data preservation is really awesome because they are doing a lot of remote sensing using satellites and whatnot, and literally mapping and remapping the United States and putting that information up there for companies to get. Now, usually it works the other way around. All these things are done in secrecy. Mining companies run around and they find a deposit and they don't tell anybody. And until they know they have something that's worthwhile there, and then they put in for their permits and whatnot. So it's a little bit of a different approach. And critical minerals mining and recycling research, they're getting another 100 million out of DOD. And they also had, this is on the infrastructure bill, I'm sorry, not DOD. There's critical minerals funding in there. Hey, what's another 100 million? Now, there are also numerous provisions for improvements to battery technology because of the cars. If we want to get to EV cars by 2035, we need batteries. And so coming to President Biden in February of 21, also Biden, also was the infrastructure bill, of course, he did an executive order on supply chains. And this was, right in the height of the pandemic, and the supply chain issues were front and center. And there's all these pictures on TV of all the tanker ships stacked up in the harbors. Well, you don't see that anymore. They got it figured out. But it did take some work, and it took some stiff arming with the unions to get those ports to fire up 24/7 and get that stuff down the road, which they seem to be doing much better. So this EO takes an all-government approach too. It wants coordination among the agencies and required numerous progress reports. And they want provisions to increase recycling and to invest in sustainable international sources by partnering with our allies. And I've mentioned that before. And the recycling world has changed in the last few years also, again, because of China. We would send so much of our recyclable materials to China for recycling, but they decided they changed their criteria for what they would accept for recycling. And that has kind of thrown a monkey wrench into a lot of the recycling streams because they're just not up to that criteria, up to that standard. And then DOE put out a strategy to secure the supply chain for robust clean energy transition. And this report lists challenges and opportunities facing the energy supply chain with key strategies to secure America's position as a clean energy superpower in the years and decades to come. And again, this is another example of DOE, recognizing their full mission. It's just not about having those commodities stacked up and ready to go. And again, in February of last year, USGS updated the critical minerals list. And as I mentioned, they dropped the uranium and they listed the individual rare earths. So now there's 50 listed. I think there was 30 something on that other one. In March of last year, the Department of the Interior issued a ROI to inform this interagency working group on mining regulations, laws, and permitting. Now, this IWG is still very active right now. EPA does not have a lead role in it, but we have a supporting role. And they're gathering information and developing recommendations for improving federal hard rock mining regs, laws, and permitting processes. And they did a large public comment period and a lot of work with the tribes. And then last May, they have this permitting action plan, which calls for facilitating interagency coordination on siting and permitting and supply chain issues for 6 sectors, one of which is the critical minerals issue. So there's a lot of meetings going on. There's a lot of talking going on. Reports are coming out and money is flowing. In March last year, the White House issued this memorandum on presidential blah, 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 more Defense Production Act. And that's where they got more money out the door without, when you use the Defense Production Act, you don't have to go to Congress to get it appropriated at first, but you have to go back the next fiscal year and get it appropriated. We just found out because some of the stuff that was in some of these early ones were not funded. Okay, on that last bill that we had for our budget. And so, this MOU, it focused on critical minerals for battery technology. And I'll let you read that quote there. But again, we need large capacity batteries for energy storage as well as for vehicles. And if we're going to get off gas, natural gas and gasoline, we need to get these minerals and we need them yesterday. And another quote from this one is sustainable and responsible domestic mining, beneficiation and value-added processing of strategic and critical minerals for the production of large capacity batteries for automotive, e-mobility, and stationary storage sectors are essential to the national defense. And again, I just mentioned the omnibus bill, and it has another one in there. It's interesting. They put in $75 million for a strategic uranium reserve. Some folks out there have been calling for this for a long time. I don't know. I've been in and around the uranium business for 40 years, and I've never heard of a shortage yet, but what do I know? There's some contracts that were recently signed with two companies to purchase uranium that's already been processed. This is stuff in the can, it's in inventory. So it's a kind of a paper transfer. But, the prices range from like $56 to $78 a pound. And this graph here shows the spot market recently. And it's been hovering around $50 for quite a while. But, if you go back a few years before that, it was in the tank really bad, well below 40. I remember when I first came around, it was $7 or $8 a pound. Whenever you see one of these major spikes, usually that's Wall Street running up the market, and it never stays high. It always comes right back down. And the spot market, again, it's $50 a pound. And it's really hard to put uranium in the can for that kind of money. Okay. ISR, probably, I don't know that there's a big margin there, but the solution mining, that's less people, less environmental impacts, less bonding. So they might be able to do it for this kind of money, but I don't see conventional uranium mining and milling being too competitive. And so if that goes forward, if the government really wants to build up this reserve, they're going to have to supplement it. They're going to have to artificially pay a higher price. And that's pretty hard to convince the stakeholders of. The industry has been hands off for a long time. They want to be market-based, let the market do its thing. And so, propping up the market is kind of contrary to most everybody. And again, there's really no lack of uranium out there, even if we exclude countries we're not friendly with. Australia and Canada have vast reserves. The stuff is all over the seafloor. There's no lack of it. Now, in the future, if all these countries build all these reactors that they say they are, then there could be more of a market. However, most of the future reactors that are going to be coming down the pike, there's no guarantee they're going to need uranium fuel. They might be something else. So what else was in the omnibus rule? Well, they didn't fund Biden's executive order to boost domestic renewable energy manufacturing. Congress didn't put the money in for that one. And DOE did receive some funding for those DPA authorities. They got $500 million to help address heat pump manufacturing and another $500 million for critical mineral mining. So DOE's fat. And they've been doing a lot of other work too. That's like not in this talk here. For instance, DOE's been doing a lot of research on recovering rare earths from coal combustion residuals. They've been doing a lot of work there, and they're seeing some progress. So with this, zeroing out in the omnibus, I don't know how DOE is going to do the rest of the stuff, but they did get some of that. And I don't know if you remember in the news when they were arguing over doing that omnibus, Senator Manchin had a controversial amendment to overhaul the permitting process. That didn't make it in. And they didn't, they're still talking about how we're going to do the permitting process. Those talks are ongoing. And just last week, DOE put out another 700 million in loan guarantees. It wasn't cash, but they put out loan 700 million for lithium, which you need for the batteries. Now, private sector money is coming in also. Energy Fuels, again, they're the ones with the uranium mill. They're entering into strategic ventures with some companies to develop rare earth metal making technology. And again, they want to either rebuild their plant or build a new plant to process individual rare earths. And again, Nio Corp and Elk Creek, they're trying to raise $1 billion. And Mountain Pass, again, they're investing 700 million in addition to what they got already. And this bottom one, that's not the same font or same text size as everybody else, because I just added it a couple hours ago. Just in the paper today, General Motors is investing 650 million into one of the 2 Nevada lithium mining projects that are in play. There's 2 of them in play, one in northern Nevada and the other one in southern Nevada. And both of these lithium mines are running into permitting problems from stakeholders and the tribes, but we'll see how that works through. So now I mentioned this interagency work group, what's going on here on reform. And again, it's run by the Department of Interior and USDA. And this is chaired high level people, deputy secretaries, and it has a lot of poobahs coming in from all these agencies and bringing their staff with them. So you got DOE, EPA, state, CEQ, the National Economic Council. So there's a lot going on there to try to coordinate these disparate agencies to work together. It's interesting, but it's working. Now, again, EPA has a secondary role on the working group, but it is providing significant input where appropriate, such as in the permitting reform. EPA has a lot of mining experience, let's face it, especially so many of them are on the Superfund. And we have such great staff out there in the different EPA regional offices that work on these things every day. And under the infrastructure law, they have to report and their recommendations to Congress. And there's been one report already, and I think the next one comes out in March. I think, we just went through the comment period on that here last week or something. So that next, like 100-day report will be coming out in March. We're still talking about permitting reform. It might come from Congress or not. Who knows what's going to come out of the Congress right now? But there's a couple of bills on the table, and they're going back and forth on it. There's a lot of lobbying going on, but if they do want to speed up this process and they do want to have domestic sources, they need to do something about these laws. They're so outdated, and they're not going to be effective. They are not fit for purpose, as we say these days. All right, so wrapping up here, numerous efforts by Trump and Biden have put forth efforts to support and stimulate this domestic critical mineral sector that includes the rare earths. Tens of millions have already been allocated. And in addition to the executive branch, Congress passed the infrastructure bill. So there's another 200 million. And the private sector is also, there's a lot of money being thrown around here. And so we should probably keep our eye on it. I know that Congress is already looking at monitoring all this money to avoid waste and fraud. And, that could be a good thing, because when you're throwing that kind of money around, sometimes mischief ensues. But we'll see. And again, you got all these competing interests, huh? And so we have to balance them. and to expand this mining, we got to still protect the environment, and we have to engage with these marginalized communities, especially tribes that have been particularly negatively impacted by mining in the past. And you may be aware that the Biden administration is big on environmental justice. And that is really where the rubber's meeting the road here on this permitting stuff and going forward with new mines, because of the disproportionate negative impacts to a lot of these minority groups in the past. And it's certainly an evolving situation. That is the end of my talk. Let me stop sharing. So that's the end of my prepared talk. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Thanks, Phil.
Yeah, thanks, John.
I'll just keep an eye on if people want to raise hands or put them in the comments. I can just keep an eye on and, help, make sure that if there are multiple questions, you're seeing them all.
Good. In the chat, let's see, Dave Allard, thanks, interesting talk. Let the fun with Tenorm begin. Thank you, Dave. Dave, of course, recently retired from the state of Pennsylvania and works on so many of these issues with me, both domestically and internationally.
Hey, Phil, I will sort of jump in here. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I did do some work with a monazite processing facility in a consulting group I was with years ago. Interestingly, there was so much thorium and serious activities in the sludges that they had to keep a foot of water on this pond, this sludge pond, because the 50-second radon 220 was still significant at the edge of the property. So that was kind of an interesting health physics issue. But anyway.
Yeah, Mountain Pass had that same problem. It's an open pit mine.
Yeah.
And they were having problems with the thoron levels in the open pit mine.
Yeah.
They're high concentrations of this stuff.
Yep.
Now, there was another question that popped up. What was that, Jeff? How many health physicists will be needed to support these mining operations? I don't think we're going to need that many HPs to support the mining operations, but we're going to need a bunch of them to regulate them. All right. These are primarily states' issues. The feds, we may pass a solid waste law, but that all gets pushed down to the states, and the states implement those. And so that's where I think we're going to be needing a lot more than the companies will need. And we'll see, because we just don't know what the future is going to bring, how many of these actually will come to pass, or if we're just going to sign contracts with Canada and Australia and get them to do their mining in an environmentally sustainable manner. One of the things we're trying to do go forward is not just off all these externalities on these other countries. We want them to be sustainable, and we want them to operate in a contemporary manner also, which is going to involve a lot of training, and we're going to probably be sending money down there too. So we will see.
Hey, Phil, one other thought that came to mind. A couple of years ago, Physics Today did a big expose on battery technology. And I think, as these organic metals and other, materials come about, that may help the situation here. I mean, there is, sort of a forcing function. The lithium and all these other rare earths are pretty rare. So I think the trick, whoever can come up with the energy density and weight issues, I think that's going to help.
Yeah, there's two issues. There's one for vehicles, and the other one is just for energy storage, from the windmills and the solar panels, Well, they're looking at vanadium batteries, look very promising. They're big. They can hold a whole lot of charge. They discharge really quick and could charge back up fairly quickly. And so there's also I'm having a little of a brain burp here now. Different technologies for storing the energy. The two reservoirs where you pump it up at night, let it run down during the day to run the turbines. Flywheel technology. Small systems can use flywheels to store energy for long periods of time. So there's things we hadn't thunk about before that are coming to the fore now for energy storage as much as for the vehicles. And it'll all get worked out. It always does. But the person that comes up with the perfect vehicle battery, their grandchildren are going to be rich. I mean, that is the holy grail right now is lighter weight vehicle batteries. Fraser, leading to national regulations, affluence, and rather than the wide. Oh, Fraser, that's the best question. Thanks for sending me such a loaded question. And yes, thank you on my beard. It'll come off at Easter. I stop shaving Labor Day and I start shaving again on Easter most years. Now, I would love to see a federal effort, all right, for national regulations. That, again, could be delegated down. I do not see anybody at EPA raising their hand wanting to go first. This is going to be probably something that would be mandated by Congress or through the courts or something like that. I am anxiously awaiting with pencil in hand to start drafting whatever they may be, whether it's a NESHAP for this or that, or discharge limits. In addition to mining, we also have oil and gas right now is the biggest source of Tenorm industrially. It just dwarfs all the other industries. And so, yes, it would be nice, Fraser, but I'm not holding my breath right now until there is pressure from stakeholders, pressure from the public. I am not aware of any senator that carries water on this issue. It's just not a political issue. And without a bumper sticker and, without the cute little catchphrase and, without the mascot, all that good things, those things you need to build awareness, it's just not happening for Tenorm right now, unfortunately. So the states will keep plodding through and doing the best they can with what they got, which is not enough. And we'll see what happens going forward. But yeah, Fraser, I would love to see that happen. The National Resources Defense Council did a report on Tenorm. I guess it's 2 years ago now, a year and a half ago. You could Google it. And it basically went through the shortcomings of all the major environmental regulations when it comes to respect to Tenorm. And it was not a pretty picture. And it's not just EPA. I mean, OSHA too. They need to get off ICRP too, please, on their regulations for radiation protection, because a lot of those workers that deal with Tenorm are not working under the Atomic Energy Act. It is night and day. For instance, if you're a licensee, I worked for the state of Colorado 11 years. I did a lot of inspections of a lot of materials. And the first thing you did in there is let me see your documentation of your radiation protection plan and show me your inventory. And neither one of those are required for Tenorm companies. We have no inventory of Tenorm in this country. And that's one of the things the IAEA is pushing. They think each country should generate its own inventory of norm sectors that are impacted by norm, and the volumes and concentrations that are put out there every year. And it's not getting anywhere fast because companies don't want to share their data. Let's see. Did I see Duncan had his hand up? Duncan.
Hi, Phil. Thanks for a very interesting talks as usual. You talked about the Atomic Energy Act. I couldn't help myself but have to weigh in on that. I certainly agree that with Tenorm, again, I mean, there's the pressure's not there right now to do federal regulations of it. I think at some point, maybe down the road, after we're long gone in rocking chairs someplace, but I think that's may happen. But right now, it's just not there. But it may come about. But again, lots to unpack. Again, again, wide-ranging talk as usual. Thank you. But again, we've heard from some agreement states that yes, the ISLs are opening back up because of the uranium reserves. There's three or four sites going that. Yeah, the $50 a pound is not. It's not going to do it. It's probably close to 70, probably for ISLs to open back up and on their own to commercially do it. But they're getting guaranteed contracts from from DOE to do this. So that's what's driving it right now. But there's we had an announcement last week. Someone else is considering opening a conventional mine in Utah. I mean,
I saw that.
There's interest out there. But again, the idea for these cobalts and these rare earth millers is going to be a lot of activity going on with that in the
it's a big deal. And you're right. And it's a righteous thing. If anybody has ever seen a documentary on the cobalt mining over in Democratic Republic of Congo, it makes you cry. You got 8-year-old kids down there barefoot digging around in this crap, and that's their life, And nobody wants to open up the Atomic Energy Act unless you know what's coming out the other end. Because that's let's face it, anytime you go to mess with a major act like that, mischief may ensue. But let's face it, it is kind of, now again, this is the disclaimer part. This is not the position of the EPA by any stretch. You might say that the Atomic Energy Act is kind of a Cold War relic. It could be reimagined in the right situation, but today is not the day.
Yeah, again, not speaking for the agency, speaking for myself personally. Disclaimers. Yeah, as I said, it's a product of that period. And it could be go through some refreshing. Yes, I mean that's for Congress to decide.
It is, and we have a little cover now because ICRP 103 brought natural radioactivity into the system of radiation protection, and that's a big deal. And of course, you got this existing situation and the planned situation, so it's not always a nice fit, but it does give direction for the IAEA and for countries on how they can move forward. I worked on ICRP Report 142, which is incorporating radiation safety into Tenorm industries that are already existing. And I just found out today, I think it was maybe yesterday, that I got put on TG, I remember the number now, 127, I think, which is evaluating the situational approach for ICRP as they look forward to the next set of recommendations, because I certainly have issues with the existing situation approach where it's needed sometimes, but I don't want to babble on about that. But things are moving in new directions as we look forward and get on these different committees that are looking down the road and not looking back. Hopefully we'll have some change in policy and stakeholder buy-in, because any one of these reprocessing things or all of these reuse of materials is such a change from our longstanding policy here of, no dilution, things like that, not incorporating radioactivity into products unless there's a benefit of adding the radioactivity, stuff like that. We're going to have to do a lot of rethinking if we're going to really get on board with these sustainable development goals, or not.
Well, I don't see anything else in the chat or any more hands.
Getting quiet.
It is 8:15. To the 24 of you who braved yet another video conference in your evening time, thanks for continuing to come out.
Really, I really appreciate this turnout. And just seeing who's on is an honor that you guys took time off tonight to listen to me babble. Thank you.
All right. With that, volunteer your friends to present to the chapter, please. I could use a couple more speakers to make it through the year, but anyway, until next time, everybody be well.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, good night, Phil. Good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.